Alrighty, folks. Erdogan, I guess, has finally made his decision. Erdogan is no simple character. He has been in power in Turkey, I think, as long as I've been alive, if I remember correctly. Remember I did a video a few weeks ago when there was an election in Turkey about, hey, could Erdogan, is there a chance Erdogan, might be defeated this time because he actually had to go to a runoff election? I didn't even do a follow-up because he won decisively. There's that question. I raised the question, hey, is it possible? No, turns out, no, it was not possible. Erdogan was not going to lose because he knows what he's doing, and he knows how to manipulate and play off the various interests in order to keep himself in power. And so for a while now, he's been kind of vacillating on this issue of Sweden in NATO. He was very much against it at first, but that's fitting for Erdogan, because Erdogan never really agrees to anything unless he gets something in return. That is how he wins. That is how he is a successful leader. Not that Turkey's in great shape or anything. I don't think that. It doesn't mean that I think that Erdogan makes good decisions. But he knows how to work politics to his advantage, even if that's not in the best interests of his fellow countrymen. And so Erdogan, very strongly opposed to Sweden in NATO, has, I guess, been able to extract whatever concession he was looking for, because he has now announced at the NATO summit in Vilnius, which I think, isn't that Latvia? I know it's one of those silly 3 Baltic countries that I increasingly am annoyed with and wish could just be wiped off the face of the earth. Not in terms of dying, just I wish these countries just didn't exist. They're annoying and they're a problem. Considering their size, they are just out. They play an outsized role of an importance now in global politics. But anyway, that's a story for another day. So it seems that Sweden, according to Erdogan, he's now vowed he's going to put it to a vote in Parliament. Now maybe, hey, he could play a trick and put it to a vote in Parliament, and then Parliament holds up the ratification and says, no, what, actually, we in Parliament have a problem with having Sweden in NATO. We don't want to oppose, or we don't want to support this. And then Erdogan is going to have to be, playing the good cop. And he's going to come back to NATO. He's going to say, folks, listen, I'm on your side. Brussels, Turkey, me, President of Turkey, I'm your friend. But you see, my legislators back home, they're skeptical of this whole Sweden and NATO thing. And you're going to have to give us something to assuage their fears. From the beginning, what Turkey wanted was essentially the disenfranchisement of Turkish refugees who lived in Sweden. In fact, there's so many did I say Turkish? I meant Kurdish. There's so many Kurds in Turkey that there's actually now like a Kurdish nationalist party that has representation in Sweden's parliament. That's not a great thing when you bring in foreign nationals to live in your country, they have a sort of a liberation struggle back in the old country, and they come to your country and they start a nationalist party. Like, could you imagine if in the United States we brought in all these Cubans to Florida back in the 50s and 70s? Could you imagine if there was some Cuban anti-communist nationalist party in Congress, and their whole political platform was just all about Cuba? From what I understand, that's what actually is the case in Sweden. I think it's only like 1 or 2 MPs. But Erdogan wanted them kicked out. He said, and he wanted them deported. He wanted to send these people back to Turkey because, the speech that they spoke in Sweden was, incitement to like terrorism in Turkey, and he wanted to prosecute them for that, for what they said, and maybe other things. Maybe he said that they actually were directly tied to terrorist activities. I don't know the details. So who knows? We haven't heard yet because this is breaking news on Erdogan making the deal. So maybe he got those guys, maybe he didn't. Maybe he got something else. Because I would think that Erdogan is the type. He's not going to tell us exactly what he wants up front. So he might have said, oh, it's all about these Kurds in Sweden. That's why we don't want Sweden in NATO. I would think that Erdogan would have a more substantial angle than that. Now, this isn't altogether a shock to me, considering that we saw Erdogan stab Putin in the back earlier this week, or I guess later last week, wasn't it, over the weekend or something, when he sent the leaders of the Azov battalion back to Ukraine. They had been in exile in Turkey. That was kind of a deal that had been made with Russia, because Russia was going to finish off Azovstal, which, for those of you who don't remember the Azovstal arc, that was quite the battle. And Azovstal, well, Azovstal was was it a factory or was it a town? What was the name, actually? They were holed up in some kind of big industrial facility, and it was the Azov battalion guys, and it was there sort of where they were named, the Sea of Azov. That's where this facility was located. I think it was in Mariupol, and so I think Azovstal was in Mariupol, if I remember correctly. So it was a part of that battle, and these guys were holed up in there for months, and there was no way that they could win. They were surrounded on all sides, but they just never surrendered, and so most of them were dead. And eventually, I think Turkey negotiated with Russia and said, hey, rather than just going in and like these guys want you to and just killing them all, why don't you let us extract them, and we'll keep them here in Turkey. So, because they won't surrender to Russia, but they'll surrender to Turkey, and we'll keep them here, and we'll take them out of the war. You won't have to worry about them. Azov will not be able to reform. They're not going to be able to recruit new members. Their whole leadership structure will be captured. And Russia said, okay. Well, now Erdogan has sent all the Azov leaders, which, by the way, the Azov battalion was the neo-Nazi faction within the Ukrainian military. Ukraine had its own separate, I guess you could even say semi-autonomous Nazi faction. They were kind of like the Waffen-SS of Ukraine. These are very highly ideological and political soldiers who believe in a neo-Nazi ideology, and through combat, they advance their ideology. They clad themselves in the memorabilia, or that's not really the right term, the iconography of the Galician SS, which under Nazi administration, the territory, part of Ukraine's territory reverted to being called Galicia, as it was called under the Austrian Empire. And the Azov guys were very proud of their World War II heritage. Well, they were welcomed back to Kiev by the Jewish Nazi himself, Zelensky, over the weekend. And this was just Erdogan's way of sticking it to Russia. So I think that a deal was made before, and that was part of the deal. NATO got two things out of it. They got Azov being sent back to Ukraine, and they got Sweden in NATO. So I expect we'll find out at some point something big that Turkey got, that Erdogan secured as a payment. And I would think that this probably is no coincidence that this is happening after his election, because I think that perhaps the NATO folks were hoping that there was a chance Erdogan could lose, and that his replacement could be more malleable, so they wouldn't need to give in to his to the concessions that he demanded in order to give them what they want. But once Erdogan won re-election, then he was in a very strong negotiating position, and he was able to say, look, I'm not going anywhere. If you want me to play along with this, you're going to need to give me something. Now, does NATO expansion into Sweden really matter at this point? To me, not really, because Sweden was never going to be friendly to Russia. Sweden is very much in the Western orbit. Whether or not they're officially a part of NATO doesn't really make much of a difference. Same with Finland at this point. We know where Finland and Sweden stand. They're not friendly to Russia. They will never be friendly to Russia, at least not Not for a couple more generations, perhaps. Things could change. Certainly things change over the years in global politics. So anyway, with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.